Support WrestleTalk!
Note to sort of flag up at the beginning is that there will be spoilers in this video. Obviously, it's very hard to talk about the highlights of AEW's Full Gear show, which was a brilliant show without giving away what happened, because there were actually some quite big twists and turns. There was an amazing closing match. There was the AEW Championship match as well between Chris Jericho and Cody Rhodes that took an interesting turn at the end. Emphasis on the turn. And there was also a really big return to AEW as well. So before I begin going through the top 3 highlights from the show, I want to give a quick shout out to Ricky Morton from Rock and Roll Express, who at the end of the match between the Young Bucks and Santana and Ortiz, Proud and Powerful pick up the victory. They start to do a beatdown on the Young Bucks, and the Rock and Roll Express, who have been in the crowd and played into the match slightly, get in the ring and they start to help out the Young Bucks to fight off Santana and Ortiz. Ricky Morton then leaps over the top rope, hits a Canadian destroyer, and then runs off the other ropes, hits a suicide dive to the outside. It is one of the craziest things I've ever seen, and what an awesome opening to the show, because it was they kind of always felt a little bit like props in the story so far of like trying to put over the Young Bucks, and that, you know, they just felt like they were just there as legends to give the shine to the Young Bucks and be part of the beatdown angle. So it was nice to see them get their comeuppance here, and in such kind of you still got it fashion. So props for those guys, because that was bloomin' wicked. Now on to the main highlight from the show, and I think this is the one that everyone will be talking about, and it was definitely the one that sort of shocked the audience the most at the arena, and it was also the one that kind of in our chat on our live stream really had people posting a lot of stuff. And this was the finale of the Cody Rhodes, Chris Jericho AEW Championship match, in which basically the whole story of the match was that Cody was kind of fighting from behind after what was a galling mistake on his part. So the ramp for the Full Gear set was connected up to the ring, so it actually just led you straight into the ring. You didn't have to go up steps or drop down or anything like that. You just walked straight in. During the match, which started quite slow and a lot of technical wrestling stuff, and it was very good, but it was very kind of old school styled, which works for Cody, I think. It's very like within his character. Jericho ends up on the outside. He's tipped out by Cody. Cody goes for this huge dive, and Jericho sidesteps. Cody's back mid-air arches in just the most horribly contorted way. He hits the ramp really, really hard and crumples. And I don't know whether this was... I feel like it was played into as kind of a big storyline bit, and I don't know whether it was this was a spot that they just did very well, or whether it was a genuine accident that he sort of hit his head as he came down. But he was bleeding quite profusely from above one of his eyes. There was a doctor literally following around at points, just dabbing him, like making sure that he wasn't, like, you know, I guess getting blood everywhere, or mostly I think making sure he was okay. But for a lot of the match, every time he like took a bit of damage outside, you'd just see this little tissue come in and just dab away at the cut above his eye. Which was, I actually thought, like, it kind of played into aspects of Cody and Dustin's match, which was obviously so blood and guts and gory, and one of the best matches AEW's put on. This, I don't think, was on that caliber, but I can see kind of the mirroring that ended up, even if it's accidental, it was still really good, interesting mirroring of that match. Jericho starts to work over Cody, who was very fiery at the beginning, came right after Jericho. This accident happens, or this gaffe happens, botched spot, this miss, whatever. And suddenly Jericho is back in control, and he is dismantling Cody for a vast majority of this match. Cody gets little bits of comeback as sort of we go through, but it ends up that Jericho lands Cody in the Lion Tamer. And he's got his knee worked into the back of him, and he's sitting down pretty low. And then he sits lower. And he sits lower. And all the while, you can see Cody's head disappearing beneath Jericho's knee. He's kicked him in the head a few times when he applies the hold as well. And then suddenly, Jericho's basically got his knee across the back of Cody's head, it seems, and in his back. And is sat down with full force on Cody. MJF, who came to ringside with Cody as his corner man, Jericho brought Jake Hager, and he was ejected from ringside for being, massively involved in cheating through a lot of the match, and the referee sort of let that pass but ejected him. So MJF was left out there on his own, watching Cody, his mentor, his friend, be just bullied by Jericho. He was being completely dismantled, and MJF gets a white towel, and throws it into the ring to stop the match. And I thought it was one of those moments where it was like, it felt like a shame that this was the first big AEW championship defense. This was the one that had all the story, had all the build. I was really, really keen to see like a sort of definitive Jericho or Cody winner here, because I felt like all the build-up stuff to it was so clever, and like Cody's passion showed through in the sort of family video, and then in that big promo he did on AEW Dynamite this week, and then Jericho's sort of disdain for the entire thing being shown through his parody promo video of Cody's family one, if you get what I mean, which was just amazing. So it would have been nice to see the kind of finish here, but I get why they did this, because MJF throws in a towel, meaning that, Cody said if he doesn't win the AEW Championship here, he will never be able to challenge for it again in the future. And MJF, by throwing the towel in, has just robbed Cody of that opportunity. Gets in the ring, Jericho leaves, goes to celebrate, have a bit of the bubbly with his mates, and MJF does just some amazing acting here. I think he looked crestfallen that he'd had to do this. He looked torn. He looked upset. Cody also had this look about him of just like, I didn't give up. He kept saying, I just kept mouthing, I didn't give up, I didn't give up. I thought it was a brilliant little moment, and obviously like fell kind of flat in the arena. Everyone, I think not that they didn't like it, but they were just shocked by what had happened. And then Cody gets to his feet. He hauls MJF up, and they stand facing each other for a moment, and Cody kind of struggles with the idea, seemingly. There's sort of an internal struggle written across his face that he's dealing with the idea that MJF has cost him this dream to be the champion within his own company. And then MJF kicks him in the balls. And it was just this simple little, it's 2019. It's the classic heel turn maneuver, isn't it? It's the Shinsuke Nakamura maneuver. Kicks him in the balls. He falls to his knees, like down and out, basically. The crowd were apoplectic about this one simple maneuver. And I think it just goes to show that, like, this masquerading, Cody and MJF's relationship hasn't necessarily been like the a really big overarching part of AEW storytelling. It's just been sort of background stuff. He's been there at Cody's important matches. They've obviously built up the idea that he's his friend, but it's not been this big defining, I'll always be your corner man, I'll always do this stuff. So I think here, it's just nice that this has been something that was told quite subtly through pay-per-views of just MJF always coming out to Cody's aid and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't like so laboured to get to this point where when MJF does it, I think everyone reads into the importance of it and goes, oh my God, I can't believe you betrayed him. Because I think at the moment, Cody, and especially in this match, was the biggest babyface in the company, just going in general. So, like, the kick happens, MJF smiles, smirks, laughs, goes to walk out of the ring. And I think it goes to show how invested people were in Cody and him and wanting him to be the champion, that someone literally throws a drink at MJF. And I don't know whether, like, there's been some debate about whether it was a plant or not who chucked a drink on MJF as he walked up the ramp, because like in the shot you could see people literally dragging him away, so taking him to the back. So it suggests that was just a fan who did it and not someone who was actually like planted by AEW to hype the drama. But like, what an amazing moment for a heel to be like, I made somebody in this year, in like 2019, the year of the smart mark, or 10 years into the year of the smart mark, if we're sort of doing a lunar cycle thing, I guess. But like, is that kind of ability to, I guess, just like put over the fact that I've got a visceral reaction from people who know that I'm pretending. And I think that is what's amazing. Like, for me, this heel turn in terms of like the reaction, this was up there with Ciampa turning on Johnny Gargano in NXT, and that kind of like watching people, or like, and this wasn't a heel turn, but Roman Reigns beating The Undertaker. Like, that is the kind of reaction that was given to MJF here when he turned on Cody. I love it. I think it's amazing. I think it works so well. And like Pete was saying on the stream, that he thinks it's maybe too early in MJF's story to turn him heel. However, I think he was always kind of heel. His relationship with Cody was kind of the only good thing that he seemed to be doing, and everything else he was still just the same character, same cocky, cocksure, slightly playful douchebag. I don't know, maybe douchebag's a strong word, but it was he had that sort of air about him, and he's obviously like played that up in interviews with wrestling journos and on social media and all of that stuff too. So he's always kind of been, messing with people. And this is now the kind of payoff to that. So they're putting him in the position that I think he would be best in anyway, which is to be a heel on AEW. And now he's a heel with mega, mega heat. And that is brilliant. I'm really happy with that. And I think that this will be the big talking point that a lot of people will take out of this show. The other big talking point, and I think the overall highlight of the show, was the match between Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley, the unsanctioned match. So after all of those shenanigans happened and everyone was a bit sort of on a little Debbie Downer about the fact that they didn't get to see Cody become the champion, or even just get to see like a proper finish to the match, Kenny Omega comes out. Jon Moxley comes out. They dim the lights. They turn them back on again. They dim the lights. They turn them back on again, because for some reason that means that the wins and losses don't count. I don't know how the machine works that they've got, but that is what happened. And Kenny and Jon put on one of the most uncomfortable matches I've ever watched. It was brilliant at all turns. It was an amazing hardcore match. However, my lord, it was difficult to watch some of the things they were doing. For example, they had, as you would imagine, the barbed wire baseball bat. They had the barbed wire broom. They regularly and often ran that across each other's backs, hit each other with it, hit each other in the head with it. Did a lot of stuff with that. They had a table without legs but covered in mouse traps, which they rolled through. Kenny Omega got dumped onto it, and then he rolled about in it for a bit. They had glass that they poured into the ring, which they scraped themselves through. Kenny Omega took a German suplex onto it. He then scooped some of it up and tried to put it in Jon Moxley's mouth. Then went to try and do a V-trigger into the glassy mouth of Jon Moxley, but Jon reversed it, got hit, spat some glass out, and then that was when the German suplex onto the glass on the floor happened. An amazing, horrifying, awful spot that really resonated, because I just thought they just went to such depths with this match of... I think that what was good about it was the fact that the storytelling works well, because Kenny Omega's on this losing streak. He's trying to get his mojo back. He's not been the Kenny Omega that he was previously. And he's looking for a way to recapture that magic. And here, it's really came across in the story of the match that Kenny is desperate for a win. He's willing to go to any lengths necessary to end this run of bad luck that he's having. And obviously, I think in terms of that bit of storytelling, the darker Kenny went, the more Jon Moxley enjoyed the match. And I think that's what's always quite fun about Jon, is that seemingly in AEW, every time he's pushed people to the limit, he's loved it more and more and more, and he just thinks it's brilliant to be let's do all this crazy stuff. The big spot, and I think this is the standout spot of the whole match, is they end up the ramp. Kenny has knocked down Jon. He calls out the Young Bucks and Adam Page, and he says, "Can you bring the thing? Can you bring the thing?" And they're a bit "Nah, man, you've really gone too far here." Nick is still also brilliantly selling his leg injury from earlier in the night. Love that. Great bit of character detail. Kenny then goes, "No, look, just bring it out." Reluctantly, Brandon Cutler and those guys bring out this, essentially just a bit of scaffolding that is covered in barbed wire. It's like a platform. It's like I guess a bit of staging platform, but they've covered it in barbed wire. It looked awful. It was something out of like, I don't know, like a Mad Max Crystal Maze, if I had to describe it. It was just, you knew that something horrible was going to happen the second you saw it. And something horrible did indeed happen. They teased doing a one-winged angel onto it. They teased doing a paradigm shift. They teased like a bunch of other stuff. And then Jon Moxley just suplexes Kenny Omega into this cradle of death, is all I can really call it. And they end up in there for absolutely ages. It was a visceral gut punch of a spot that just made every single bit of my skin crawl watching it. And I loved it. I thought it was great. But it was just something that I didn't think I'd see Kenny Omega do that. I didn't think that was kind of like necessarily the wrestling they wanted to put on. But I like the fact that also, like I said before, it works story-wise to have Kenny go to darker and deeper limits to beat Jon, because one, their rivalry has stretched across the history of AEW, and two, the short history obviously, and two, like, he's trying to end a run of bad luck. So this all kind of makes sense. Whereas for Jon, him jumping sort of wholeheartedly into a barbed wire bed also makes perfect sense. That then, like, they spend some time in there. They get sort of dragged out by everyone, sort of carefully picking them out while trying to keep their elbows and their wrists and their hands away from all the barbed wire. And then Kenny Omega V-triggers Jon through the Full Gear like logo sign, like the bat symbol for Full Gear, in another excellent, brilliant little bit of like, oh, and there's more punishment, and there's more. And every time you thought this match had kind of reached its peak, there was more. And, you know, we ended up back in the ring, and Jon has torn up the canvas, he's torn up the mats, he's torn up the padding, and suddenly we're just left with the hardwood floor. So, Kenny hits a move, pins Jon kicks out. Match carries on. Kenny goes up to the top, and he's going to go for a Phoenix Splash. Little callback to Kota Ibushi that was said on commentary. Misses. Brains himself on the mat. Sorry, not on the mat, on the actual just hard wood of the ring, which I don't think was like... It was obviously part of the story, but again, he collided so hard that his head went sort of across the wood a bit, and he ended up with quite a big bruise and like an immediate cut, basically, as if you could tell where the cut came from because he was already covered in loads of barbed wire cuts, weirdly. He does that. Jon picks him up. Paradigm shift. 1, 2, 3. Jon Moxley is the winner of this match, which, again, makes sense. And I think there's a lot that you can do character-wise with this kind of moment because, yeah, it's Jon. Jon shouldn't necessarily be that bothered about whether or not he's like in the running for the title, whether he's not, what rating he's got because of his winners and losses records. Because, like I said, this unsanctioned match doesn't count towards your wins and loss record. So there was even a point where he sat in the ring and he goes, "What am I now? Like fifth, fourth, fifth, fourth, fifth? I'll tell you what it matters." And then he swears at the camera. It's like none of it effing matters. So I think this was a kind of perfect. Like Jon is just trying to tick people off his list and trying to have the kind of matches he wants to have. I think, you know, real life Jon and character Jon are both trying to do that to some degree. This made Kenny Omega look so driven and focused in pursuit of a victory and proved that it would be his downfall as well. And I liked that. And I liked this sort of, it created a bit more tension between the Elite, which is something they can play into if they're ever going to do the Inner Circle versus Elite storyline, which I think that all of these sort of subtle things that you can spin out of these these little actions and these little happenstances throughout the matches are really interesting and will be pertinent hopefully later down the line. Like, you know, Cody being betrayed by MJF and everyone else from the Elite not being there to help him. Kenny Omega going to deeper and darker places here and it not working out for him. There's just so much you can drag into this much wider feud with this big faction that's basically trying to take over your company. So I love this match. I think it is the standout match from the whole of the show, and it's well worth seeking out if you haven't seen it already. But if you're here, maybe you have already. Maybe you've seen it on the internet. So check it out if not. And then the final highlight from the show was that we had a big return to AEW, somebody who's been out injured for a while. One, Mr. Christopher Daniels. And it was very nice to see the Fallen Angel back. So this, as you would imagine, came at the end of the SCU versus Lucha Bros versus Private Party match that happened quite early into the show. The match itself was amazing. I'm still flabbergasted at the things that Phoenix can do in the ring. He did a couple of spots where he just walked along the ropes as if like it was nothing, as if it would like he does it as if it's just as normal as walking on the ground. He did a spot where he bounced on one rope, bounced up to the other side, bounced down, bounced up again, and then hit a twisting corkscrew moonsault thing to everyone on the outside. He then also cut off a huge dive. I think Scorpio Sky was going for the dive. And he cut it off by running across the top rope and just nailing him with a kick. And then that's when he hit the big dive to the outside with the jumping, spinning, corkscrewy, jumpy thing. It was like, as you would imagine from a match that has all of these components in it, really, really good. I'm not necessarily overly convinced by the idea of these triple tag team matches in which only two competitors can be in the ring and everyone else just has to stand there. But in this one scenario, I think they made it work as part of the story, because the story was essentially that it was the Lucha Bros versus SCU and Private Party for most of the match. The Luchas were, to all intents and purposes, really in control of what was happening for a long stretch of the match. And then there were a lot of blind tags in that sort of switched the personnel around, but it was always one of the Luchas in the ring. So they were coming into the finish already tired. They'd already absorbed a lot of punishment, but they'd also doled out a lot of punishment and looked very strong doing it. They don't pick up the victory. SCU managed to retain the titles by pinning Private Party, which works perfectly for the continuation of this feud, which I think should continue probably until the Lucha Bros win the titles off SCU, because they would be fantastic champions for the company, I think, and also they are incredibly over, even as a heel act. And this only served to protect them as well, this finish. Like, they weren't, like, in the same way that they were protected from the loss to SCU in the championship tournament finals, because it was a roll-up finish. So it was a bit of a sneak. It wasn't necessarily like a solid 1-2-3 pinfall, so they didn't look too bad. And then it was also the fact that now here, they weren't. There was an extra element added to the match at the last minute on Dynamite, and they were the ones who took the pin, and the Lucha Bros were kept out of it. Now, naturally, the Lucha Bros, being the heels, hop back in the ring after the match, and they start to beat down SCU. Then the lights dim, and suddenly, when they come back up, another Pentagon Jr. is standing there, because clearly the keys to his locker room are just left lying around. Anyone could get hold of an outfit of Pentagon Jr. in AEW. However, it's that Pentagon Jr. attacks, hits the Fallen Angel, and then Christopher Daniels. Is it the Fallen Angel? I don't know. I think it's the Fallen Angel. And then he takes the mask off, and it's Christopher Daniels with the sort of Ankh eye makeup on. I love this sort of return. It was they rushed. He then picked up a chair and rushed sort of Pentagon out of the ring. They stood there, beckoning them to sort of pick the fight again and, you know, continue the feud. And I think that's a really good idea to go forward with, because to me that's a big money match that you haven't really paid off on. Like, as good as the tag tournament finals were, there's clearly so much more we can do with these teams put together. I am going to wrap that up now and just say that, yeah, Full Gear was an amazing show, and you should definitely seek it out and watch it. There wasn't a bad match on the show. The big standout was definitely Jon Moxley, Kenny Omega. The two tag matches were incredible too. The women's match was a lot of fun, even if Emi Sakura's Freddie Mercury thing kind of passes over. Like, I don't really get it necessarily, but they managed to put on what was a really awesome, fun match. Pac versus Hangman Page is brilliant as well. So yeah, it is a well done show that, though quite limited, I think, in terms of big story happenings. Like, I think really the big bit of story is the Cody Rhodes match. And that's fine, because that's the one that's really had all the sort of story build into it. So for really good wrestling, this is worth a watch. For amazing storytelling, that match is worth a watch. The other ones have bits in it that will, I think, be built out further in future. So again, another brilliant pay-per-view for AEW. Thank you for watching. If we ever manage to ever get this on YouTube, click the videos that appear somewhere here to watch more awesome WrestleTalk stuff. And that, I guess, was Full Gear.